Obviously, you can start on any adventure motorcycle and be successful. Many have and continue to do so. Anytime I post anything about starting on a small bike, I always get comments like, I started on a 1250 GS and I was fine. That's great. You can do that. But if I'm recommending an adventure bike to a new rider, there are some that I absolutely would tell them to 100% avoid. And these are the last 6 bikes that I would recommend to a new adventure rider. So I'm assuming a few things here. I'm assuming that you are new-ish to off-road riding, have limited off-pavement experience, but you do want to ride off-pavement some of the time. If you're just gonna go touring all the time and never leave the pavement, go to campgrounds that are paved, all that, then maybe this advice is not as useful. Generally, I recommend starting with a smaller dual sport, building up your skills and confidence, and then moving up to an ADV bike. But if you're dead set on starting with an ADV bike, here are 6 to avoid. Also, as always, these are my personal opinions. Your experience may vary. I can only go off of what I've ridden, read, talked to people about, and my personal impressions. Having said all that, the first adventure bike that I would highly recommend that you avoid if you're a new adventure rider, and honestly just avoid entirely, it's not one of my favorites, is the Yamaha Super Tenere 1200. This is a 584-pound motorcycle that is incredibly heavy, one of the heaviest adventure bikes on the market, yet it only makes 112 horsepower. Just for comparison, the Triumph Tiger 1200 makes 147 horsepower, and even the old BMW 1200 GS makes 125 horsepower. So it's too heavy and underpowered. It's $16,000 new. You can get much better bikes for $16,000. You can get 2 much better bikes for $16,000. The Super Tenere 1200 may have its place, but to me, it's a touring bike, and it's an underpowered, overweight touring bike at that. It is reliable, I'll give you that. It's maybe one of the most reliable bikes I'm gonna mention, but there are honestly just better options out there. I don't really recommend this bike regardless of your riding experience, unless you just get a smoking deal on one and plan on never leaving the pavement. I'm just not a fan of the Super Tenere 1200. Sorry, Yamaha, you know I love you. The number 2 adventure bike I would recommend avoiding if you are a new off-road or adventure rider is the KTM 1290 Super Adventure and the upcoming KTM 1390 Super Adventure. My first note is, it's a meme. You sometimes see it when a cat is like running around and he says, fastest boy, that's pretty much sums up the KTM 1290 Super Adventure. But didn't you just say the Super Tenere was underpowered? Isn't more power better? Yes, it is in terms of power to weight ratio, but this bike has 160 horsepower. It's a rocket. It's faster than a Ferrari. Like, I don't know if that's true, but I bet it is. It also has a 35-inch seat height and is 550 pounds. So really fast, really tall, and pretty heavy. All things that a new rider should be avoiding. It's also $21,000, so incredibly expensive. And with all the trouble that KTM is having right now, you could maybe get a smoking deal on one, but there is a lot of uncertainty there for the future of the company. That's a consideration. I would just avoid the 1290 Super Adventure, the 1390 Super Adventure. Really anything over a 790 I think is probably bad for a new rider, and even the 790 is questionable. The third worst adventure bike for beginners, in my opinion, is probably the most popular and most famous adventure bike of all time. It is the BMW 1300 GS, but I would also include the 1200 and 1250. There's a long history of those. They're obviously the bikes that Charlie and Ewan were riding when they made Long Way Round, the reason for the renaissance of adventure bike riding. But this is an expensive motorcycle. A new one starts at $19,000 but goes up to like $27,000. It weighs 522 pounds for the 1300 GS. You're gonna drop your first off-road bike a lot. You will. When you're learning to ride off-road, this is what we do. Do you really want to be continually dropping a bike that costs more than I made in my first year as a manager at Hollywood Video? First year as a manager, I made less than one of these bikes costs. You're also going to be picking it up over and over. That's 522 pounds over and over and over again. There's a lot to say about the 1200, 1250, 1300 GS, but it is not a good bike for beginners. I've seen what happens when one of these goes sideways, when one little thing goes wrong. This is one of the broken legs I didn't get on camera, but I was there. The leg was broken, it was bad, and it happened in the blink of an eye. Nobody even knew what went down, but it's just a really heavy bike to be coming down on you, and if you're an unskilled rider, the chances of it coming down on you are pretty high. I'd avoid this as a new rider unless you are just doing highway, or at least avoid it until you have some skills built up. It's an expensive bike that's really heavy and not easy to ride. Obviously, someone's gonna chime in with, how come there's a BMW 1200, 1250, 1300 on every BDR video? Because they're capable in the hands of a skilled rider who has the confidence to commit the power and weight. That's not you if you're watching this video. You could buy 3 brand new DR650s for the price of one 1300 GS. You could buy your bike and have 2 spares for the same money. Number 4 ADV bike I would recommend avoiding if you are a beginner. This one will be mildly controversial because I always see it on the list of good adventure bikes for beginners, but the Suzuki V-Strom 1000. I suppose this applies to the new 1050, although I don't know as much about it, but the V-Strom 1000, so there's the 650 and the 1000. People always say the 650 is a great choice for a new rider because they're inexpensive, easy to get a hold of. I have opinions about that, but of the two, I would recommend the 1000 the least. It is 520 pounds and only 98 horsepower. And of the two, the 1000 is generally regarded as the less reliable. So if you're looking at picking up a high mileage, inexpensive adventure bike, I would avoid the DL 1000 and go for the 650. The 1000 only has 6.5 inches of ground clearance. It's not a great off-road bike. You're gonna find those limitations pretty quickly, even on just like a rocky road, or honestly, something with like a lot of rain ruts and stuff. You may find the limitations of that. Basically, if you're dead set on a Strom, you wanna be a Strom trooper, I'd look for the 650. It's more reliable of the two. It's easier to ride, but honestly, neither Strom would be my first choice of recommendation for a new adventure rider. Okay. You've probably picked up on it by now. There's a little bit of a pattern here. Yes, I don't really recommend anything over 800 cc's for a true ADV beginner. So while they're great bikes, I also think beginners should stay away from things like the Tiger 1200, Africa Twin, BMW 900, KTM 890, Norden 901, etc. You get the idea. But here are a couple smaller, less obvious bikes that I also think beginners should avoid. Number 5, worst adventure bike for a new rider, Triumph Tiger 800XC. I love the Triumph Tiger 900. I've heard nothing but good things about it. Every time I ride one, I want to buy it. It's a very fun bike, and I think they've made a lot of strides and come a long way in terms of manufacturing quality and quality control and all of that. Kudos to Triumph. They're doing great stuff lately. But the Tiger 800XC is sort of the black sheep of the family. From what I hear, and I have not owned one, but I have a couple friends who have, that one, they're not super reliable. Admittedly, it's not super heavy at 473 pounds, so there's a plus. It only makes 82 horsepower, and admittedly, I've said admittedly 12 times, admittedly, this entry on the list is a little bit more subjective. I haven't ridden one. I don't know as much about it. It doesn't have like the blatant red flags of some of the other bikes, but I have literally never heard anyone say anything good about these bikes. Your opinion may differ. Please share in the comments, but everybody I know that's owned one has gotten rid of it and had been glad to do so. I think a lot of people end up with these bikes because they seem to be out there cheap, farkled, and with low miles, and you gotta wonder why that is. People don't keep them and they don't ride them very much. The demand is low, and that's why the prices are so low. So I don't like the Tiger 800, honestly, at all, but I really wouldn't recommend it for a new rider. If you're looking for a cheaper, older bike, there are way better options out there. I'd much rather see you on a V-Strom 650, and even that wouldn't be my first choice. And the 6th and final worst adventure bike for new riders is gonna surprise you because it's a bike that I owned and loved, the Tenere 700. Yes, the amazing, inexpensive, incredibly capable, very fun, super uber reliable Tenere 700 is a great, fantastic motorcycle for an intermediate rider and beyond. I love the bike, but it's not super beginner friendly. It has a tall seat height at 34.5 inches. And yes, that's not the tallest, but I found it hard to get my feet down. I have a 30-inch inseam, and something about the combination of the bike design, foot beg placement, and the top heaviness of the bike, I was constantly thinking about where I was going to put my feet down, looking for a stump or a rock on the side of the road or a rut to go down into, so I didn't have to stress about getting my feet down. I was tippy toes on that bike all the time. The stiff suspension is a factor in that too, because it doesn't squat as much, so it doesn't give you as much extra reach to the ground. But I think that bike is pretty tall and feels very tall for a new rider. It's also just like weirdly top heavy. This is not a deal breaker for an experienced rider, okay? It's not the big deal people have made it out to be. And once you start riding, it kind of disappears. But for a new rider who's barely getting their feet down, the tippiness of this bike is pretty intimidating. That fuel tank is up way high on the bike because of the super tall engine design and the great ground clearance. So all of that adds up to top heaviness, and it just doesn't take very far. You don't have to tip that bike very far before you start to feel like, oh God, it's really heavy, I'm not gonna catch it. There are other bikes out there that don't have that issue that weigh the same amount. It's all about height and where the weight is placed. It's like a really fat cat on top of a ladder. Once it starts to tip, you're not gonna be able to hold it up from the bottom. Also, one thing that people don't really talk about or consider as much for new riders, and this is maybe controversial, but I don't think it should be for new riders, there's no rider aids on that bike. It has ABS that you can turn off. Yes, the Tenere 700 is not the most powerful bike on earth, but it's easy to break loose. It's got a lot of torque and power, and it's fun that way, but there's no traction control, wheelie control, no rider aids at all to save your ass when you give it too much gas on a gravel corner or wet pavement, or try to take off when you're on a hill and it's loose or slick. It's a bike that demands more skill from the rider. That's a good thing if you have the skill. No nannies interfering with what you're trying to do, no intervening obnoxious electronic aids, but as a new rider, that stuff is actually super useful on a big bike. And if you're looking for an adventure bike, you know, you probably want one that you can put in rain mode or that has a kind of intuitive gravel mode, not one that's going to put all the power to the wheel immediately and you have to learn how to modulate the clutch and all that. If you don't know how to do that, it's a very hard bike to start on. So I would not recommend the Tenere 700 to a true beginner. It's tall and unwieldy and you'll be thinking about it a lot. And the whole point of learning to ride as a beginner is building confidence. If I've learned anything from my time in my educational theory and psychology classes, it's that when you're afraid, your brain can't learn. If you're thinking about being afraid and not getting your feet down, you're not growing your skills as fast. Tenere 700 is one of my favorite bikes ever, but I don't recommend it for new riders. Now that you know what to avoid, maybe you're wondering what you should actually look for. Well, I have a video, beginner ADV bike tier list that I made that's got 10 or 12 of my favorite adventure bikes for new riders ranked from F to S tier, so you can see what I would recommend if that's something you're looking for. You want to get another opinion before you make your decision. If you're looking for more dual sport and adventure content, please consider subscribing to the channel because I'm the dork in the road and I want to be your internet riding buddy, and I'm better than your regular riding buddies because I come with a mute button. Thanks to all of you who've been supporting the channel by using my affiliate links to Rocky Mountain, Amazon, Revzilla, Cyclops, Flying Eyes, Motocamp Nerd, and the others. You'll find those links in the description. Just bookmark it and click it every time you head to the website and you'll be supporting dorky motorcycling content and my child's college education without even trying. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you, and please do not forget to be excellent to each other. Thank you.